responsible consumption and production. Number 14 is life below water. Number 15 it's life on land. And number 16, peace, justice, and strong
Así es. Sí,
institutions.
porque por
And number
ejemplo, en
17
hotel,
is
les voy a
partnerships
decir algo,
for
o
the goals.
sea, a mí se me hizo muy mala onda de Laura. Te voy a decir por qué.
Hello everyone,
Es que
I'm
éramos un
Roberto
hombre
Juarez,
control.
and
Ella me
today
tenía que preguntarle al
we are
señor,
going to talk
el
about
señor
the
les cobró
Sustainable Development
32 y
Goals,
no sé cuánto que le hizo.
specifically about
Y
the
todas
SDG
tienen miedo
acceleration
de sus
actions
cuerpos y
and the
engordaron.
COVID-19 response.
Entonces
But
ya iba a
I
sobrar.
think it's
Si ella lo hizo
necessary
así,
to
entonces
talk
ella no
about the
pagó,
Sustainable
no pagó la
Development
otra
Goals,
parte, yo se la pagué,
each
pero pues
one, so
no
we
pasa nada. O
understand
sea,
what
de
are
momento
the
me
implications
encabronó,
of the
de
COVID-19
momento me encabronó,
on
pero después dije,
the
ay, o
Sustainable
sea,
Development Goals.
mira, yo le vi tan contenta, entonces digo, ay, yo
Let's
quiero volver a
start
ese
right
lugar,
now.
que no fui
The
ahora con
Sustainable
ustedes, porque ahora
Development
quiero
Goals
venir con
are
ustedes
the
por la
blueprint to
alegría y
achieve
todo.
a better
Pero pues,
future to
mira, la
everyone.
verdad que
As you can see right
no,
now, we can
no
see
lo
this
mamá, porque
image
mi
of the
mamá no,
17
por
Sustainable Development
dinero,
Goals,
pues
and
esto está
I
para
would
eso,
love to count
y pues no fui.
every single one of them. So first one, we have no
Siento que fue
poverty.
una parte abuso
Second
de ella
Sustainable
porque
Development
o
Goals
es
is
tonta
zero
o
hunger.
se quiso hacer
The
tonta.
number 3
Pero
is
bueno,
good health and
ya
well-being.
voy.
Number 4
Hizo error.
is quality education. 5 is gender equality. Number 7, it's affordable and clean energy. Number 8 is decent growth and economic growth.
No,
Number
hasta le
9
dije que
is
se para ella sí iba a
infrastructure
decir que estaba
innovation
pagando, que les descontara.
and qualities. Number 11, we have sustainable cities and communities. Number 12 is responsible consumption and production. Number 13 is climate action. Number 14 is life below water. Number 15 it's life on land. And number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. And number 17 is partnerships for the goals. So now that we know the 17 goals, we need to understand how are they classified, how are they divided, and how can we achieve every single of them specifically. First of all, we need to understand that the Sustainable Development Goals are a complex agenda, but at the same way, it's a simple agenda. The 17 goals are all each one are interdependent one to another. By this, we mean that we not only have to achieve the 17 sustainable development, I mean that achieving a majority of them or improving in three specific sustainable development goals will definitely have a hard impact on the other sustainable development goals. The sustainable development goals are a heritage of the Millennium Development Goals. The one that you're actually seeing on this image, on the Millennium Development Goals, we have only 8 goals in contrast to the Sustainable Development Goals, which are just 17. We have 8 Millennium Development Goals, which I will love to read also, so we have a deep understand of what is the heritage and what's the correspondence between one, eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. Number 2, achieve universal primary education. Number 3, promote gender equality and empower women. Number 4, reduce 5, improve maternal health. Number 6 is combat AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. Number 7, ensure environmental sustainability. And number 8, global partnerships for the goal. The Millennium Development Goals were created in the year 2000 by the nations trying to reduce the inequalities in the world, but specifically in this geography, the world were facing some hard troubles, some hard problems with access to education and child mortality. Talking about the in Africa and other developing countries, we were facing tough times where the countries were increasing thanks to their commerce and their life expectation, but at the same time, we were facing an increase of the inequality bridge between all the countries. One country was developing faster than the other, and this increased serious problems in a long time perspective. So these are Millennium Development Goals, and this is the pre agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals. We see a huge improvement. Actually, it's like if doubles the agenda because here we have eight and the Sustainable Development. On talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to talk about climate action, which is the main soul of the agenda. We now know that development goals are specific as we can see if we see what's the relation between all the goals and the climate action. Climate change is a social, economic, political problem that next generations are going to face the results of bad policies taken by past generations. So we have climate action on SDG number 13, but we need to talk more about how we can improve and reduce the inequality bridge on our societies. The increase of the oceans, the wildfires all over the world are some effects will derivated in migration and in more poverty in developing countries. So let's now talk about each goals and how are they related. Right now in this third image, we can see the map of the world, and we have a difference between each country by colors. Each colors mean a demographic Gini coefficient, which is a representation of inequality through the countries. A darker color indicates that we are seeing more inequality, not only in access of education, but in opportunities and, and equity. So as we can see here in this other lighter color, that these are actually the northern parts of the world, and in contrast to the southeast part of the world, when we have a tough and bigger inequality range coefficient. So now let's talk about this image, which will help us more about uh, the Sustainable Development Goals, COVID-19, and climate change. Though a lot of people don't actually know or realize the relevance of the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda, they might now know because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is the first little way that we're seeing on this image. Through the past years and through the past decades, human try to reduce inequalities in our societies. And these main efforts, these global efforts, have very good results. 30 years, we reduce the line of poverty and worldwide. So right now, due to COVID-19 pandemic, we are facing 30 years. We're facing a specific time where poverty is increasing for the first time. So that's why it is so important to talk about climate, because these were some situations that altered the whole conversation and the whole relationships. So that's why I think it's actually more important to talk about this right now that the past the Sustainable Development Goals. Let's talk about the Sustainable Development Goals are a call for action by all countries, poor, rich, and middle income, to promote prosperity while protecting that and ending poverty must go hand in hand with strategies that build economic growth and address a range of social needs, including education, social protection, tackling climate change, environmental protection. More important than ever, the goals provide a critical framework for COVID-19 recovery and poverty in all its forms everywhere. Globally, the number of people living in extreme poverty declined from 36% in 1990 to 10%. But the pace of change is decelerating, and the COVID-19 crisis risks reversing decades of progress in the fight against poverty. New research published by the Developed Economic Research warns that the economic fallout from the global pandemic could increase global poverty by as much as half billion people, or 8% of the total human population. Poverty has increased globally in 30 years since 1990. More than 700 million people, or 10% of global population, still live in extreme poverty today, struggling to fulfill the most basic needs like health, education, and access to water and sanitation, to name a few. The majority of people living on less than 1.98 day live in sub-Saharan Africa. Worldwide, the poverty rate in rural areas is 17.2%, more than 3 times higher than in areas. For those who work, having a job does not guarantee a decent living. In fact, 8% of employed workers and their families worldwide live in extreme poverty in 2018. 1 out of 5 children live in extreme poverty. Ensuring social protection for all children and other vulnerable groups is critical to developing countries' arm of the pandemic, not only as health crisis, but as devastating social and economic crisis over the months and years to come. According to UNDP, income losses are expected to exceed 220 billion in developing countries, and an estimate of 55% of the global population have no access to social protection. These losses will reverberate across society, impacting education, human rights, and in the most severe cases, basic food security and nutrition. To support the poorest and most vulnerable, the UN has issued a framework for immediate socioeconomic response of international support and political commitment to have access to essential services and social protection. Response and Recovery Fund aims to specifically support low and middle income countries as well as vulnerable groups who are disproportionately bearing the social economic impacts of the pandemic. Women leaders, convened by UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed, have called for support for the UN roadmap for social economic recovery and for relief funding of the UN Response and Recovery Fund. Now let's talk about some facts and figures about the goal number one. According to the most recent estimate, in 2015, 10% of the world's population, or 73.34 million people, live on less than $1.80 a day. Southern Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa are expected to lose the largest increase in extreme poverty, with an additional 32 million and 26 million people above the international poverty line as a result of the pandemic. The share of the world's workers living in extreme poverty fell by half over the last decade, from 14.3% in 2010 to 7.1% in 2019. Let's now talk about the Sustainable Development Goals number 2, zero hunger. They decline the number of people who suffer from hunger as, as measured by the prevalence measurement began to slowly increase again in 2015. Nearly 690 million people are hungry, or 8.9% of worldwide population. up by 10 and by nearly 60 million in 5 years. The world is now on track to achieve zero hunger by 2030. If recent trends continue, the numbers of people affected by hunger will surpass 800 for a million people by 2030. According to the World Food Programme, 5 million people suffer from acute hunger, largely due to man-made conflicts, climate change, and economic downturns. The COVID-19 pandemic will now double that number, putting an additional 130 million people at risk of suffering 2020. A quarter of a billion people potentially on the brink of starvation, swift actions needs to be taken to provide food and humanitarian relief to the most at-risk regions. At the same time, a profound change of global food and agriculture if we are not nourished the more than 690 million people who are hungry today, and the additional 2 billion people the world will have by 2030. Productivity and sustainable food production are crucial to help alleviate the perils of hunger. The World Food Programme Food Assistance Program provides a critical lifeline to 87 million vulnerable people across the world. The analysis of the economic and food security implications of the pandemic outlines the potential impact of COVID-19 on the world's poorest people. In the light of the pandemic's effects on the food and agricultural sector, prompt measures are needed to ensure that food supply chains and keep alive to mitigate the risk of large shocks that leave a considerate impact of everybody essential on the poor and most vulnerable. In order to address this risk, the urges countries to meet the immediate food needs of their vulnerable population, boost social protection programs, keep global food trade going, and keep domestic supply chain gears moving, support small holders farmers' ability to increase food production. The UN Global Humanitarian Response Plans lays out steps to fight the virus in the world's poorest countries and address the need of the most vulnerable people, including those facing food insecurity. Now let's talk about the Sustainable Development Goal number 3. Ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages, or as well known, good health and well-being. Ensuring healthy life and promoting well-being at all ages is essential to sustainable development. Currently, the world is facing a global health crisis. Online, COVID-19 is spreading human suffering, destabilizing the global economy, and upending around the globe. Before the pandemic, major progress was made in improving the health of millions of people. Significant strides were made in increasing life expectancy and reducing some of the common killers associated with child and maternal mortality. But more efforts are needed to fully eradicate a wide range of diseases and address many different persistent and focusing on provide more efficient funding on health systems, improve sanitation and hygiene, and increase access to physicians. Significant progress can be made in helping to save millions of lives. Health emergencies such as COVID-19 have slowed the critical needs for preparedness. The United Nations Development Programme highlighted huge disparities in countries' abilities to cope with and recover from COVID-19 crisis. The pandemic provides a watershed moment for health emergency preparedness and for investment in critical 21st century public services. The World Health Organization has been leading a global effort to tackle COVID-19. The Strategic Preparedness and Response Plan, produced by World Health Organization and partners, outlines measures that countries should take to prepare for and respond to COVID-19. The strategy update of April 2020 provides further guidance for public health response to COVID-19 at national and subnational levels and highlights the coordinated support that is required for the international community to meet the challenge of COVID-19. People and organizations who want to help fight the pandemic and support who partners can donate through the COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund, which supports World Health Organization's work to track and understand the spread of the virus. Patients get care and they need frontline workers get essential supplies and information. Let's now talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, which is called quality education. It enables upward socioeconomic mobility and is a key to escaping poverty. Over the past decade, major progress was made towards increasing access to education at all levels, particularly from girls. Nevertheless, about 260 million children were still out of school in 2018. Nearly one-fifth of children population in that group are more than half of all children and adolescents worldwide are not meeting minimal proficiency standards in reading and mathematics. In 2020, as the COVID-19 pandemic spreads across the announced the temporary close of schools, impacting more than 91% of students worldwide. By April 2020, close of 1.6 billion children and youth were out of school. 69 million children who relied on school meals need to look to other sources for daily nutrition. Never before have so many children been out of schools at the same time, disrupting learning and upleading lives, specifically to most marginalized. The global pandemic has far-reaching consequences that might jeopardize hard-won gains made in improving global education. In an collaboration and ensure that education never stops, UNESCO is mounting and response with a set of initiatives that include the global monitoring and national to localize school the well-being of children and ensure they have access to continued learning. UNESCO in March of 2020 launched the COVID-19 Global Economic Coalition, a multi-sectoral partnerships between organizations, media, and IT partners to design and develop innovative solutions. Together they help countries tackle content and connect gaps and facilitate inclusive learning opportunities for children and youth during the pandemic. The Global Education Coalition aims to help countries to mobilize resources and implement context-appropriate solutions to provide education remotely, liberating high-tech, low-tech, and no-tech approaches, seek equitable solutions and universal access, ensure coordinated response, and avoid overlapping efforts of students to schools when they reopen to avoid an upsurge in drop rates. Now let's talk about Sustainable Development Goals number 5, gender equality and women's empowerment. The goal number 5 talks about achieve gender equality and empower all women. Remember that gender equality is not only fundamental human right, but a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. There has been progress over the last decade. More girls are going to school. Fewer girls are forced into early marriage. Two women are serving in parliament and positions of leadership, and laws are being reformed to advance gender equality. Despite these gains, many challenges remain. Discriminatory laws and social norms remain pervasive. Women continues to be underrepresented at all levels of political leadership, and 1 in 5 women are girls between the ages of 15 and 49 report experiencing by an intimate partner within a 12-month period. The effects of COVID-19 pandemic could reverse the limited progress that have been made on gender equality and women's rights. The coronavirus outbreak exacerbates existing inequalities for women and girls across every sphere, from health and economic to security and social protection. Women play a disproportionate role in a response in responding the virus, including as frontline health care workers and careers at homes. Women's unpaid care work has increased significantly as a result of school closures and the increased needs of older people. Women are also harder hit by the economic impacts of COVID-19 as they disproportionately work in insecure labor markets. Nearly 60% of women work in the formal economy, which puts them at a greater risk of falling into poverty. The pandemic has also led to a step increase in violence against women and girls. With lockdown measures in place, many women are trapped at home with their abusers, struggling to access services that are suffering from cuts and restrictions. Emerging data shows that since the outbreak of the pandemic, violence against women and girls, and particularly domestic violence, has intensified. Now let's talk about the Sustainable Development Goal number 6, which is water and sanitation. Goal number 6 talks about ensure access to water and sanitation for all. Clean water and sanitation. While substantial progress has been made in increasing access to clean drinking water and sanitation, billions of people, mostly in sub-rural areas, still lack these basic services. Worldwide, 1 in 3 people do not have access to safe drinking water, who 2 out of 5 people do not have a basic hand washing facility with soap and water, and more than 673 million people still practice open defecation. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated the critical importance of sanitation, hygiene, and adequate access to clean water for preventing and containing diseases. Hand hygiene saves lives. According to the World Health Organization, hand washing is one of the most effective actions you can take to reduce the spread of pathogens to prevent infections, including the COVID-19 virus. Yet billions of people still lack of water sanitation and funding is unequitable. The COVID-19 response availability and access to water, which is acronym is WASH, services is fundamental to fighting the virus and preserving the health and well-being of millions. COVID-19 will not stop without access to safe water from people living in vulnerability. The impact of COVID-19 will be considerably higher on the urban poor living in slums who don't have access to clean water, access to running water and hand washing in formal settlements. UNICEF is urgently appealing for funding and support to reach more girls and boys with basic water, sanitation, and hygiene facilities, specifically those children who are cut off from safe water because they live in remote areas or in places where water is untreated or polluted, or because they are without a home living in response to the COVID-19 of migration. OIM is adjusting its WASH services to prevent the spread of the disease. This includes continued support to affect at-risk low capacity of secure WASH services as prevention control in health facilities. Let's now talk about the Sustainable Development Goal number 7, which is energy, and also known as ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy. The world is making progress towards Goal 7, which encouraging signs that energy is becoming more sustainable and widely available. Access to electricity in poorer countries has begun to accelerate, energy efficiency continues to improve, and renewable energy is making impressive gains in the electricity sector. Nevertheless, more focused attention is needed to improve access to clean and safe cleaning fuels and technologies for 3 billion people, to expand the use of renewable energy beyond the electricity sector, and to increase electrification in sub-Saharan Africa. The Energy Progress Report provides a global dashboard to register progress on energy access, energy efficiency, and renewable energy. It is a country of these three pillars and provides a snapshot of how far we are from achieving the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals targets. Lack of access to energy may harm efforts to contain COVID-19 across many parts of the world. Energy services are key to preventing disease and fighting pandemics, from powering healthcare facilities and supplying clean water for essential hygiene, to enabling communication and IT services that connect people while maintaining social distancing. 789 million people, predominantly in sub-Saharan Africa, are living without access to electricity, and hundreds of millions more only have access to very limited or unreliable electricity. It is estimated 40% of health facilities in sub-Saharan Africa. Yet, energy is critical need to keep people connected at home and to run life-saving equipment in hospitals. If hospitals and local communities don't have access to power, this could magnify the human catastrophe and significantly slow the global recovery. The Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Sustainable Development for all explained why energy access matters during the coronavirus emergency and outlined three ways to respond to the COVID-19 emergency. Energy solutions to power health clinics and first responders. Second, we need to keep vulnerable consumers connected. And three, increase more reliable, uninterrupted, and sufficient energy production in preparation for a more sustainable. Let's now talk about Sustainable Development Goals number 8, which is economic growth, or also known as decent work and economic growth. Promote exclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for all. Sustainable and inclusive economic growth can drive progress, create improved living standards. COVID-19 has disrupted billions of lives and endangered the global as bad or as worse than in 2009. As job losses escalate, the International Labour Organization estimates that nearly half of all the global workforce is at risk of losing their livelihoods. Even before 25 countries, home to billions of people living in poverty, were likely to see per capita incomes stagnate to decline in 2020. Now, the economic and financial shifts to industrial production, falling commodity prices, financial insecurity are directing the already tepid economic growth and compounding heightened risk from other factors. The COVID-19 has caused a historic levels of deprivation and unemployment, degrading an unprecedented human crisis that is hitting the poorest hardest. The United Nations released a framework for the immediate social aid as a roadmap to support countries' path to social and economic recovery. It calls for an extraordinary scale of international support and political commitment to ensure that people everywhere have access to essential services. The social economic response framework consists of 5 streams of work. First, ensuring that essential health services are still available, protecting health, helping people cope with adversity through social protection and basic services. 3. Inform sector workers through economic response and recovery programs. 4. Guiding the necessary research in physical and financial stimulus to make macroeconomic policies work for the most vulnerable and straining multilateral and regional response. And 5. Promoting social cohesion and investing in community-led resilience and response systems. These 5 streams are connected by strong environmental sustainability and a gender build back better. Let's now talk about the Sustainable Development Goal number 9, infrastructure and industrialization. Global 9, Goal number 9 talks about build resilient infrastructure, promote sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. Inclusive and sustainable industrialization, together with innovation and infrastructure, can unleash dynamics that generate employment and income. They play a key role in introducing and promoting new technologies, facilitating international trade, and enabling that efficient use of resources. The world still has a long way to go fully tap this potential. Least developing countries, in particular, need to accelerate the development of their manufacturing sector if they are to meet the 2030 target and scale up investment in scientific research and innovation. Global manufacturing growth has been steadily declining even before the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic is hitting manufacturing industries hard and causing disruptions in global value chain and the supply of products. Innovation and technology progress are key to find lasting solutions to both economic and environmental challenges, such as increasing resources and energy efficiency. Globally, investment in research and development as a proportion of GDP increased from 1.5% in 2015 and remaining almost unchanged in 2017, but was only less than 1% in developing regions. The coronavirus pandemic has released the urgent needs to resilient infrastructure. The notes that critical infrastructure in the region remains far from adequate in many countries, despite the rapid economic growth and development in the region that experienced over the past decade. The economic Asia and the Pacific highlights that making infrastructure resilient to disaster and climate change would require an additional investment of 434 billion per year. The sum may need to be even greater in some regions, such as the Pacific Small Island development stage. Let's now talk about Sustainable Development Goal number 10, inequality. Reduce inequality within and among countries. Reducing inequalities and ensuring no one is left behind are integral to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Inequality within and among countries is persisting cause of concern. This reducing inequality in some dimensions, such as reducing reliable income inequality in some countries, a preferential trade status benefiting lower income countries. Inequality still persists. COVID-19 has deepened existing inequalities, hitting the poorest and most vulnerable communities the hardest. It has put a spotlight on economic inequalities and fragile social safety nets to bear the brunt of the crisis. At the same time, social, political, and economical inequalities have amplified the impacts of the pandemic. On the economic front, the COVID-19 pandemic significantly increased global unemployment and dramatically slashed workers' incomes. COVID-19 also put at risk the limited progress that has been made on gender equality and women's rights over the past decades. Social protection, the impacts of COVID-19 are exacerbated from women and girls simply by virtue of their sex, tipping for vulnerable populations in countries with weaker health systems and those facing existing humanitarian and migrants are as well as indigenous people, older persons, people with disabilities and children are particularly at risk of being left behind in hate speech targeting vulnerable groups. It is rising. Let's now talk about the Sustainable Development Goals number 11. Cities. Make cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. The world is becoming increasingly urbanized. Since 2007, more than half the world's population have been living in cities, and that share is projected to rise to 60% by 2030. Cities are metropolitan areas that are powerhouses of economic growth, contributing about 60% of global GDP. However, they also account for about 70% of global carbon emissions and over 60% of resource use. Rapid urbanization is